tried to stop feeling afraid, and it didn't work. It's not a lack of faith. It's not weakness of character. You prayed. You tried to trust. You took deep breaths, read scripture, listened to sermons, maybe even went to therapy. And the fear was still there. Quiet. Constant. Like a pressure in your chest you've learned to carry because you don't know how to put it down. And sometimes, at 3 a.m, or in the middle of an ordinary day that had nothing wrong with it, it hits with full force. No warning, no apparent reason. And you find yourself thinking, why do I still feel this? Why won't it go away? This isn't movie fear. It's not the shock of a near fall or a nightmare. It's something else. It's more like a constant pressure you learn to carry until the moment it becomes too heavy. And the hardest part isn't the fear itself. It's that it doesn't scream. It whispers. Low, constant, from somewhere deep inside the soul. You cancel things because of it, without realizing it was the reason. You go quiet in moments when you should have spoken. You say yes when you meant no, and spend hours turning it over in your mind afterward, alone. You postpone. You wait. You convince yourself that it's just not the right time yet. And when someone asks how you're doing, you say, "I'm fine." But you know you're not completely fine. You know that feeling. Here's what no one has told you about that fear. It's not because you're doing something wrong. It's not because your faith isn't strong enough. It's because the fear you're feeling has a root that most people, including most of the advice you've ever been given, have never come close to touching. And here is the question almost no one dares to ask out loud, not even to themselves. What if this fear isn't weakness? What if it's not a psychological problem or lack of willpower? What if it has a far deeper root and a far more real healing than you ever imagined? Most people deal with fear by trying to manage it. Deep breathing, rationalizing, podcasts, another meditation app, and those things might help in the moment. But there is an enormous difference between managing a symptom and healing what lies beneath it, down at the root, deep inside. That difference is exactly what this video is about. There is a saint who lived over 600 years ago, a woman who had more objective reasons to be consumed by fear and anxiety than any of us, who grew up surrounded by death, who buried neighbors, friends, members of her own family, in the worst catastrophe in European history, who had no position, no title, no protection of any kind, and who discovered something about fear that the Catholic Church considered so true, so deep, so transformative, that it named her a doctor of the Church. One of only a handful of women to receive that title in 2,000 years of Christian history. What Catherine of Siena discovered about fear and anxiety will change how you see them. It will change what you do with them. And maybe, if you let it, it will change how you live from this moment forward. But before we go further, if something in those first words touched something in you, if you recognized that fear we're talking about, I want to ask you something. Like this video right now, not because the number matters, but because recognizing that you need to hear this is already the first step toward healing. It's a small act, but it's an act of honesty with yourself. Subscribe to Holy Remedy. What comes next was made for you. The world Catherine of Siena was born into was not safe. It was 1347. Siena, Italy. And fear wasn't an existential metaphor, wasn't nameless anxiety, wasn't that pressure in your chest you can't quite explain. It was concrete. It was the smell of the streets. Imagine waking up one morning to find that half your neighbors are simply gone. The baker, the family across the street, the friend you talked to just yesterday. Vanished, bodies piling up because there weren't enough people left to bury the dead. The Black Death would sweep away between 30 and 60% of Europe's population in less than a generation. Siena lost 2/3 of its people. This wasn't the end of the world as a metaphor. It was the end of the world as reality. Catherine was the 24th of 25 children. Her twin sister died shortly after birth. She grew up in a world where death was a neighbor, where chaos was routine, where the question, "Will I still be here tomorrow?" wasn't philosophical. It was practical. And here is what almost no one tells you about her. Before she was a saint, before she was a doctor of the church, before the visions, before the letters to popes, before anything history recorded, Catherine of Siena was a terrified young woman. Terrified of being too small for what she felt inside. Terrified of making mistakes, of being misunderstood, of being dismissed. Terrified of carrying a calling she couldn't fully understand. In an era when a young woman with no title and no position had no voice anywhere, she felt the weight of something pushing her forward and the fear pulling her back. That conflict, that inner tug of war, she knew from the inside. At 6 years old, Catherine had the first of a series of visions. She saw Christ crowned in glory, looking directly at her, above the Church of San Domenico in Siena. And what she felt, according to her own account, was not terror. It was a strange clarity, as if there were something on the other side of fear, something larger, more solid, more permanent than anything she had ever known. But she didn't understand it immediately. None of us do. It took years. It took darkness. It took an inner battle she herself would describe decades later as the hardest one of all. And it wasn't the plague. It wasn't the death all around her. It was the fear of herself. The fear of being insufficient for what God was asking. The fear that modern therapy would try to categorize, medicate, manage, but that she learned to move through in a completely different way. She never entered a convent. She was a Dominican tertiary, a lay Christian woman living in the ordinary world. She spent 3 years in near total seclusion in a small room in her parents' home. 3 years of silence, of deep prayer, of inner warfare, until she felt the clear call, enough hiding. Go into the world. And she went, without a title, without formal protection, with fear still alive inside her, but without letting it hold the reins. What she discovered in those 3 years of silence, the remedy she found for her own anxiety, for her own terror, is exactly what this video is here to reveal. Because what Catherine of Siena learned about fear is not distant spiritual theory. It is a soul remedy that is over 600 years old, and that modern therapy, for all its progress, has never been able to fully replicate. And you are about to discover what it is. What St. Catherine of Siena discovered about fear is not what you expect to hear. It's not, be brave. It's not, just trust God more. It's not the vague formula you've heard 1,000 times that, deep down, never actually changes anything. It's not self-help advice with a Christian label on it. And it's not what modern therapy offers you, however sophisticated it may be. It's something deeper, more precise. And once you understand it, you'll realize that mental health and the healing of the soul were never two separate things. They never were. Catherine understood fear not as a character flaw, not as weakness of faith, but as a signal, a precise signal, like a symptom that points to a deeper cause. And her teaching has 3 dimensions, 3 layers. We're going into each one, because it's in the 3rd that the remedy that changes everything is found. First dimension, fear is not the problem, it's the symptom. Think about this image. When you anchor a boat, everything about how that boat moves depends entirely on where the anchor was dropped. If the anchor is in shifting sand, the smallest wind moves the boat. If the anchor is in solid rock, the boat can ride out a storm without losing its way. St. Catherine of Siena understood fear exactly like this, not as the cause of the problem, but as evidence of where the anchor is. And where do most of us anchor our souls? In the approval of the people around us, in the success of a project, in financial stability, in physical health, in the permanence of our relationships, in the image other people have of us. All of these things are real. All of them have value. But every single one of them can be taken away. One comment changes the approval. One mistake changes the project. One diagnosis changes the health. One loss changes the relationship. And when the soul is anchored in something that can be taken, any threat to that anchor point produces fear and anxiety. Not because you're weak, but because the anchor point is unstable by nature. Catherine called this disordered love, loving the right things in the wrong order. It's not wrong to love people, work, health, the future. What's dangerous is making them the core on which everything else depends, because the day any one of them wavers, and they all will at some point, the soul wavers with them. Catherine of Siena's first lesson, then, is not, don't be afraid. It is, understand where the fear is coming from. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is the GPS pointing to where your anchor is. And when you understand that, when you stop fighting the fear and start listening to it as a signal, something begins to shift inside you. Second dimension. The remedy isn't less fear, it's a different anchor. We live in a culture completely obsessed with managing anxiety. There are apps for that. Breathing techniques, cognitive protocols, journaling, positive affirmations, guided meditations, and therapy, which has real value, which helps in concrete ways, but which, on its own, often reaches the root and stops there without knowing what to put in its place. Catherine would say that most of these approaches are doing one thing: making life with the anchor in shifting sand more bearable, making the boat more comfortable while the storm comes. What she proposed was different. Not more comfort in the same place, a change of place. The sole remedy that Catherine of Siena found is not the absence of danger. It is a change of anchor point, moving the anchor from what can be taken to what cannot, from the temporary to the eternal, from what depends on circumstances to what exists before them and after them. And here we arrive at her own words, the words of a saint who cared for plague victims when everyone else was running away, who was threatened, ridiculed, challenged at every step, who had every objective reason to shrink back and didn't. She wrote, "The soul always fears until it arrives at true love." Pause there for a moment. She didn't say fear disappears when you pray more. She didn't say faith eliminates anxiety. She said the soul always fears until it finds the love that is greater than fear. Not the absence of fear, the presence of something greater. And that love, that anchor point Catherine found, she didn't reach it through willpower. She reached it through surrender, through what she called yielding to Divine Providence, a surrender that is not passivity. It is the most courageous act there is. It is releasing control over what was never yours to control, and trusting what God, through the Holy Spirit, is already doing in the interior of every soul that opens itself to that. She wrote in one of her letters, "Leave it to Providence. Providence still has its eyes on you." That line, that simple prescription, is the heart of everything she ever taught about fear. But there is a third dimension, and this one is the most urgent, the most practical, and the one that speaks most directly to how we live today. There is something in Catherine's teaching that almost no one talks about, and it is the most powerful part of everything she ever wrote. Third dimension. the gaze that feeds fear. Catherine of Siena observed something about the internal structure of anxiety that is extraordinarily precise, something that modern psychology has spent centuries beginning to discover. Fear feeds on a specific direction of the gaze, the soul that keeps obsessively staring at what might go wrong, what already went wrong, what others think, the future that frightens, the failure that shames. That soul is doing something very concrete, feeding fear with attention. And fear grows in exact proportion to the attention it receives. You know this loop. It's scrolling at 11 at night and walking away feeling like your life is not enough, like everyone else is ahead, like you've fallen behind. It's 3 in the morning, mentally replaying the conversation that went wrong, building better responses to something that's already over. It's the what if that won't stop. What if it falls apart? What if it doesn't work out? What if it's too late? What if I'm not enough? Catherine called this contemplating the wounds, and she said, with surgical precision, that wounds grow in proportion to how long they are contemplated. Not because the pain isn't real. It is. Not because the problems are an illusion. They're not. But because obsessive attention to them magnifies them beyond what they are and paralyzes the soul from the inside. Inner healing, according to Catherine of Siena, begins with a deliberate change in the direction of the gaze, not denying the wound, not pretending it doesn't exist, but actively, repeatedly, like exercising a muscle you need to build, redirecting attention toward the source, toward Christ, toward what is permanent, toward what no storm, no loss, no collapse can ever touch. She knew this isn't a one-time achievement. She wrestled with it her entire life. But she said that every time she made that movement, every time she stopped contemplating the abyss and re-dropped the anchor, she came back different, less fragile, more whole, more herself. That is healing. Not in the sense that the pain disappears, in the sense that it loses the power to govern. This teaching, this framework about fear, the anchor, the gaze, is not the poetic metaphor of a medieval nun disconnected from reality. Catherine of Siena lived in Siena when the city was dying around her. She physically carried plague victims through the streets when others were fleeing. She was called hysterical, presumptuous, dangerous, by bishops, by cardinals, by people with the real power to destroy her reputation. And she kept going, not because she didn't feel the weight, but because she had found an anchor point that the weight could not move. That is the remedy. That is the holy remedy. Now I need to tell you the most audacious story of Catherine of Siena's life. And when I say audacious, I'm understating it. The year is 1376. Catherine is 29 years old. She has no office, no title, no formal political influence of any kind. She is a woman in the 14th century, which is already enough to understand the weight of the constraints surrounding her. A woman that most people around her still didn't take completely seriously. And she decides to write a letter to the Pope. Not just any letter, a letter demanding that Gregory the Pope of the entire Catholic Church, settled in Avignon, France, where the papal seat had been for 67 years, leave the comfortable security of the French court and return to Rome. To give you a sense of what that meant, it would be the equivalent of someone today, with no credentials, no office, no institutional backing of any kind, writing to the leader of a world superpower, demanding a change that would reshape the course of history, and expecting it to work. The voice of fear would say, "Who do you think you are?" Catherine heard that voice, and wrote anyway. She called the Pope Babbo, Daddy, with all the warmth, all the tender familiarity that word carries in Italian. A 29-year-old woman with no title, no formal authority, calling the head of the entire Catholic Church Daddy. not out of disrespect, but because she was writing from a place where human hierarchy had lost its power to intimidate. She knew who her true father was, and that changed everything about the weight of the words she used. She wrote, "Come, do not be afraid. Be courageous, not as a coward, but as a man who does not retreat. Answer the call of God." And the Pope returned to Rome, not because Catherine had political power, but because she was writing from a place where fear had lost its authority, and words that come from that place carry a weight that ordinary words simply don't have. There is a spiritual authority that needs no office to function. There is an inner healing so deep that it transforms not only the one who receives it, but everything that person touches. Catherine of Siena wrote over 380 letters over the course of her life, to popes, cardinals, queens, kings, generals, to people with the real power to silence her, imprison her, destroy everything she had built. And in every letter there was the same quality, the quality of someone who knows where she is anchored, who has found the soul remedy we've been talking about, and writes from there. She admitted to being afraid. She wrote about it. She didn't pretend to be some supernatural creature immune to weakness. But she had learned, through years of inner warfare, of silence, of prayer, of surrender to Divine Providence, to put fear in its proper place. As information, not as a ruler. Fear said, "You're too small." She listened and moved the anchor. Fear said, "You'll be ridiculed." She listened and moved the anchor. Fear said, "Who are you to write to the Pope?" She listened and moved the anchor. That is the movement, not a permanent conquest, a movement that repeats, a choice that renews itself, a muscle that is trained, exactly as she described. And now I need to say something directly to you who have been carrying a fear you can't quite name for a long time now. Who knows exactly what you're afraid of, but has never said it out loud, because it feels too big, or too small, or too irrational to deserve attention. To you who have canceled things because of it, without realizing it was the reason. Who went quiet when you wanted to speak. Who waited for the right moment that never came, and kept waiting, and it kept not coming. To you who says yes when you mean no, and calls it being kind, but knows deep down its fear of what happens if you disappoint someone. To you who made a mistake some time ago and is still carrying the weight of it, afraid it might be too late to fix it, to start over, to try again. To you who lost someone or something you deeply loved, and now you're afraid to love again with the same intensity, because you know what loss feels like. To you who is exhausted, not from work, not from a busy schedule, exhausted on the inside, exhausted from carrying the weight of a fear that no therapy, no podcast, no app has ever been able to truly touch. Catherine of Siena had the same fear you have, the same inner voice telling her she was too small, too ordinary, too insufficient for what she felt called to be. She wasn't born courageous. She learned, slowly, where that voice comes from, and she learned, through the Holy Spirit, through years of prayer and inner warfare, to stop letting it make her decisions. This doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't happen from one video. It doesn't happen from one technique. But it begins with one movement. Just one. The movement of asking yourself honestly, where is my anchor? What am I leaning on when the fear arrives? And is that anchor solid enough for what I'm facing? That question, that honest question to yourself, is exactly where Catherine of Siena started. It's where everything she ever did in her life began. And it's where your own process of inner healing can start to move forward too. Before we're done, I want to leave you with a question. Not to answer right now, not to solve today, just to carry with you over the next few days, and let it work from the inside? It's a simple question, and it's the same one Catherine of Siena asked herself every time the fear came. What are you anchored to? When the anxiety arrives, the nameless pressure in your chest, the silence you hold when you should have spoken, the yes you say when you mean no. What's being threatened? What is it that you can't imagine losing? This isn't a judgment question. There's no right or wrong answer. It's a map. And when you find out where the anchor is, you already know what you need to do. Catherine of Siena's secret, the secret that brought you here, wasn't that she had no fear. It was that she had learned what to do with it. It was that she had found an anchor point that no plague, no war, no humiliation, no threat could ever move. And from that place, anchored in something that couldn't be taken away, in Jesus himself, she cared for the dying when others were running. She wrote to the Pope when no one dared. She spoke the truth when it was dangerous to speak. She lived 33 years, the same age as Christ, with an intensity that still resonates 6 centuries later. Not because she was a mystic, because she learned to be human the right way. Catherine of Siena spent 33 years in this world surrounded by death, by chaos, by fear, her own and everyone else's. And she didn't leave behind a formula, not a method, not a 5-step protocol for overcoming anxiety. She left behind an entire life as evidence that it is possible to walk through the worst that exists and not be consumed by it. She wrote in one of her letters, "Be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire." Not with anger, not with willpower, with the peace of someone who has found where to anchor the soul. May you find that too. May you anchor your soul in Jesus a little more each day, like a sheep that rests in the care of its shepherd. If this video found you at the right moment, if something here touched a place you couldn't name, Holy Remedy was made for you. Not to grow a channel, for this. To find the people who need to hear that the oldest Christian wisdom in the world still has a precise word for what you're living through right now.